That transition to proof of stake is now resulted in the country, the entire country now looks like Madonna. So what happens now is that after 40 years of this, interest rates started going higher, as they would do in a cycle, because it's all very cyclical. And that layer cake of fraud, everything that's securitized against securitized. FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried is really a microcosm of the American story for the past 45 years. And all you need to do is not steal. Just don't steal.
Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Talk Crypto. In today's video, we have Bitcoin advocates Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert commenting on America's fraudulent governance model as opposed to El Salvador. Keiser says that governance models should exist and they're not the problem, but the people in charge who abuse their power. The government's role should be to ensure life, liberty, and property, but instead they use fiat money to create chaos, corruption, and steal from their people. Keiser adds that the COVID lockdown has triggered a massive layer on top of the ongoing money printing Ponzi, increasing 40% of the money supply in just a year, which has led to rising inflation, therefore widening the wealth and income gap. Unlike the US government, who has engaged in accelerated plunder over the last 20 years, El Salvador adopted Bitcoin's righteous governance model and is investing in the country's growth. President Bukele has recently stated that governments have enough money to do right by their citizens as long as nobody steals. Furthermore, Keiser states that America's transition to the proof-of-stake mentality has resulted in a series of facelifts, manipulation and lack of accountability, and refers to the similarities with Madonna and Sam Bankman-Fried. Let's listen to Max and Stacy as they go deep down the rabbit hole of fiat money fraud. But before we do, please consider subscribing to our channel, as we bring you daily content on the latest crypto news. And now, let's jump right into the video.
So, no, President Bukele opened this huge prison. It's like the biggest in Latin America, 40,000 prisoners. And after the unveiling of this new prison, he tweeted something that went viral, of course. The president said this. He said, "The money is enough when nobody steals."
Right, it's only 7 words. And it's just a shockingly succinct, powerful phrase. But, you know, it brings up a lot of things. A Bastiat quote, you talk about his essay, life, liberty, and property are the things that government is there to ensure or to protect or to help guide. Okay, so there is a role for government. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist that says government, no government is just anarcho-capitalism. I think that there is a role for governance because governance is threaded throughout our lives. Bitcoin protocol is governed by the protocol. There's a governance model. Governance models are not the problem. The problem is people who abuse their powers and use fiat money to create total chaos and mayhem and corruption. And what he's saying very simply is we've got a governance here that's pretty straightforward, and we are a country that has money enough to do the things that we guarantee for our citizens, life, liberty, and property. And one of the things we're doing to ensure life, liberty, and property is to get rid of the gangs, right? The gangs who, by the way, were exported for the most part, from Los Angeles prisons. So the money is there, you know, if you don't steal it, right? If you don't steal the money, there's plenty of money there. There's a society here. They're governed, they pay taxes, the government's got a kitty with a lot of money in it, and they're using that money to invest in the country. And all you need to do is not steal. Just don't steal.
Now, this happens in the United States, as I said, as well. Since 2001, it's been accelerating plunder, right? You've mentioned this before. So that's when they began to just plunder. And then every single crisis that has happened since then, they printed more, or they introduced these programs, and they used to like try to make, some sort of intellectual arguments for it. But with COVID, they just like abandoned everything. The amount of plunder, they just started like going crazy. Surely this whole thing is gonna fall apart. It doesn't disappear overnight, but you're starting to see that disintegration now.
Right. It is the end game of a Ponzi scheme. So the COVID lockdown triggered a massive layer on top of the Ponzi scheme. You know, the Ponzi scheme works because you have to keep printing more money to pay off the investors who were early in the Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
And so when you hit the COVID crisis and there was a slowdown in an international trade, and you had a potential slowdown in the economy that would have triggered a collapse of the Ponzi scheme. There was a drawdown, there was a slowdown, which was revealing like the tide going out. Suddenly, as Warren Buffett would say, everyone's naked. And, oh my God, there's a Ponzi. So to respond to that, they had to engage in such a massive quantitative easing, like money printing bacchanalia of multi-trillion-dollar, that you had that money supply, 40%, money supply increased 40% in a year, right? I think that's the most shocking increase ever, probably in history of any country ever, in the sheer numbers of it. And the results are complete malinvestment, complete kind of wealth and income gap. As Bukele points out, there's plenty of money if you don't steal. Well, when they did that massive bailout during the COVID, there was a massive fraud, massive stealing. The PPP loan program was a massive fraudulent program. And you and I were watching all this unfold. And yes, it resulted in, now we have this incipient inflation problem, and it's just rolling on top of each other. Non-self.
It wasn't quantitative easing what they engaged in during the COVID thing. It was actual money printing. So quantitative easing is just like, yeah, it's money printing, but not actually. It's accounting trickery.
I said it was quantitative easing. It's like it had. You're right. It's actual from the Treasury printing money. Right?
Yeah. So that hadn't been done since, say, World War II.
Right.
So that's something that's new, and I have to say, the people loved it.
Yes, they did.
Governments have been engaging in money printing supposedly to inject in the economy, but the reality, as Max points out, is that most of the money never reaches the lower classes. This is known as the Cantillon effect, which describes how new money creation benefits those closer to Washington and Wall Street, through government contracts and cheap loans, at the expense of those furthest from the creation of it. Let's listen to Max as he goes deep down the rabbit hole, explaining how this whole process is much worse than what Sam Bankman-Fried did with FTX.
The journey of America is one of hard work and prudence and probity.
Proof of work.
Proof of work.
Now it's proof of stake.
Now it's just proof of stake. And that transition to proof of stake is now resulted in the country. The entire country now looks like Madonna. You know what I'm saying? Like it looks like Madonna at the Grammys. There's so many fillers, so much facelifts, so many manipulations. I mean, this is what America now. Madonna is the face of America, because there's no accountability. There's no grounding to reality. It's like we can keep getting facelifts forever, and let's not look in the mirror, and let's pretend that this is not a grotesque deformation of the material girl from the 1980s. I mean, and this is in the United States. In the 1980s, under Reagan, I guess that Reagan period was kind of a bust out. The Cold War was over. America came out of the Berlin Wall came down. There was a feel good. The Top Gun movie came out. Let's conquer the world. We won the end of history, according to Francis Fukuyama. Capitalism, Americanism won. And now here we are 45 years later, and it looks like Madonna.
And they injected quantitative easing into the banking system that was, supposed to just be part of an economy, and then became this freak monster that was the economy.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So that switch was done kind of starting in the 80s, with Reagan and deregulation, the introduction of derivatives, illicit derivatives. We've talked about this before, so let me just go down this rabbit hole once again. That all institutions in the United States, anything that throws off any kind of income was turned into a security and securitized and packaged by Wall Street and gutted and traded and deformed.
Yes.
And this was the reconstitution of everything in the United States into a product sold and bought on Wall Street and commodified and securitized. And this goes on for 20, 30, 40 years. And it's all based on cheaper interest rates and the ability to extend maturity on the bond market. So what happens now is that after 40 years of this, interest rates started going higher, as they would do in a cycle, because it's all very cyclical. And that layer cake of fraud, everything that's securitized against securitized. FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried is really a microcosm of the American story for the past 45 years. He took a fraudulent token, the FTT, and he used it as collateral to spin up layer after layer after layer of cross-collateralized, recollateralized, rehypothecated layer cake of holographic proportions of nonsense, and then it collapsed.
When you're talking about those derivatives, what they said is like, okay, well, here's the U.S. economy. It's $1 trillion. right? In 1980. But by 2023, it'll be 22 trillion. So let's just pull that here. Let's spend that 22 trillion now. Good times for us. Like,
Right.
and we'll figure out what to do by that time.
Right. And the guy who is the biggest proponent of that ridiculous line of thinking is Paul Krugman of the New York Times,
Yes.
who's their chief economist and a Nobel Prize winning economist, who says debt doesn't matter. It's just money we owe ourselves.
Well, we're just stealing from ourselves. President Bukele is saying, no, it's not okay to steal from ourselves, because who is the ourselves? Like, it's the future. It's your children. It's your grandchildren.
Right. The interest on the debt in America now is approaching $1 trillion. Just the interest. When I started on Wall Street, I believe the entire debt of the country was like $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Now here we are 45 years later, and the interest on that debt is $1 trillion. And so the millennials and the Gen Z and the up and coming generations are experiencing complete future shock that the inflation is real because of all that money printing and borrowing. The economies are been exported abroad to create derivatives to reward people in the instant. The baby boomers, of which I am, took all that cash at the expense of all these other generations. Yeah. And so Paul Krugman would still say that debt doesn't matter and we should just ignore the debt. And of course, everyone in Washington, D.C., and you talked about the State of the Union address, you know, I believe, I only saw like 6 seconds of it, but I believe they were banging the table on infrastructure again. And of course, they're going to be like, let's go into debt by 5 or 10 or $20 trillion more to do infrastructure. And of course, get that interest payment on the debt to 2 or 3 trillion. And that's called currency collapse. And that's where we're at in the cycle for the dollar. And the baby boomers consumed 50, 60, 100 years worth of consumption in 10 or 20 years.
Yes.
And the people that came after us are now, dealing with higher inflation. They can't afford stuff. They can't afford housing. They can't afford rent. They can't afford food because we stole it all. It was stolen. And to get back to the Bukele quote, there's money enough if you don't steal. So don't steal. Like, that's a basic lesson. It's in every spiritual text, every religious text, every communal text, every form of governance that's ever existed for 100,000 years. One of the basic principles is don't steal. But somehow in 2023 in the United States, that is still a foreign concept. Stealing is legal. People go to the CVS, the drugstore, and just steal stuff. And there's looting, wholesale looting. And they walk out the door and they're like, well, I'm stealing because stealing is the way. Stealing is the way.
It's the mentality, by the way, of proof of stake. Pretty much all of the coins, the 25,000 coins, are just that. They're all stealing. It's one form of stealing or another. And it's just unethical, it's immoral, and it's doomed to the same Madonna-like thing. Like, at the end of the day, you have a freak show. And that's what you see in those 25,000 shit coins that they're called here.
Yeah, and why I have to tip my hat to Michael Saylor, because he always brings up ethics and morals, and in terms of all the shit coins and what they represent, it is unethical and immoral to engage in shit coinery. And Bitcoin is not that case at all. It's completely righteous.
Things can get pretty messed up when the government steps in to take over spending with printed money. Max reiterates this Ponzi scheme is how the government has been stealing money from the people, making it much worse than the FTX scam. The easiest way to protect yourself from an unfair distribution of new money is to opt out of that monetary system altogether. Bitcoin fixes this by only giving new bitcoins to miners who secure the protocol, divorcing the creation of new money from politics, making it much fairer. This is known as the Nakamoto effect. What do you think of Max's take on this? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give us a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. This is Let's Talk Crypto, and we'll see you in the next video.